Quantum non-locality and time travel. There is no universal now. The distinction between the past, present, and future are illusions. Space-time may be a circle, such as the future leads to the present, and the past leads to the future, thereby creating multiple futures and past, which allow information from the future to affect the present. Causes may cause themselves. Coupled with evidence from entanglement, where choices made in the future affect measurements made in the present, and theoretical tachyons, which travel at superluminal speeds from the future to the present and in the past. This may account for precognition, deja vu, and premonitions. In quantum mechanics, with reality and the quantum continuum of unity, and time is also a unity, such that the future, present, past is a continuum which are linked, and the same can be said for consciousness, which exists in the future and the present and the past. If considered as a world line in space-like instead of a time-like interval in consciousness, then birth to death would be linked as a basic unity, extending not in time but space, and the same can be said for space-time and consciousness, are also linked and interact via the wave function, and as demonstrated by entanglement and the uncertainty principle. Space-time may also contract, such that time may also slow down, and consciousness may be given a glimpse of the future in advance of other conscious minds. Time is relative to the observer. Since there are innumerable observers, due to gravity, velocity, and other variables, there is no universal past, present, or future. Therefore, the future is the past is the future. It is the unity and relativity of time which makes time travel possible, as well as some of the unique features of consciousness, such as premonition, during which the observer experiences or is affected by the future before it becomes the present. The former is indicative of the latter effect to what is known as quantum non-locality single entity effect. Time is relative due to entanglement, in which the future can affect the past and may be experienced in the present, depending on the observer's frame of reference. The individual mind, via consciousness, is an inherent property of all matter, and therefore mind and matter cannot be separated. The observer's frame of reference exists in the underlying multidimensional space-time reality. Consciousness is therefore considered an aspect of the wave information, and a special position takes the feature of a superposition, in which the space-time phase information can be restored and reassembled. Time is the fourth dimension. Hence, 3 Euclidean dimensions of space are combined with a dimension of time, thereby creating a 4-dimensional manifold known as space-time. Space-time is affected by gravity and acceleration, and can shrink and contract as gravity and velocity increases in response to alterations in cerebral activity and thus consciousness. Therefore, consciousness arises in our brain and through extra dimensions that creates an electromagnetic interaction, which infers the concept of a quantum brain as an expression of a universal mind through holonomic communication with quantum fields. The quantum non-local collapse of the wave function, 2 neurotransmitter synapses exist as a transmission of a quantum state. Therefore, quantum effects may directly affect neuronal functioning. When time-space contracts, more time is compactified into smaller spaces, and it takes less time to reach the future, which is squeezed closer to the present. Whereas, perspective of this dissociated consciousness, time may appear to slow down, thus paralleling some of the paradoxes of time travel. The time-traveling consciousness experiences the future more quickly and in less time, thereby providing the foundations of deja vu, premonitions, and anticipation, and the ability to make accurate predictions and plan for the future. Evidence from relativity, quantum mechanics, atomic clocks, and space-time contraction demonstrates that the future, or at least the future, must have existed, so this future could contract closer to the present experienced by the time traveler. This is also proved by experiments in entanglement and Einstein's field equations, which demonstrate that time is a circle, where the present leads to the future, which already exists, and the future leads to the present and in the past. That is, instead of the present moving toward a future which does not yet exist, the future already exists and streams towards consciousness, becoming the present, and then continues into the past relative to the observing consciousness. However, consciousness may also accelerate as reflected by increasing brain activity, and this too would contract space-time. Quantum states can extend across macroscopic areas of the brain, as well as a result, therefore, of quantum tunneling that exists at gap junctions linking dendrites of different neurons, in which brain processes have many properties of holograms. Therefore, sensory perception is seen as an electromagnetic activation propagating through the brain. These sensory waves can interfere with memory, as projecting as a wave to produce a holographic structure to the least action principle constrains the trajectories of these waves. This realm exists as a quantum superposition of possibilities, until consciousness gives them substantiality by collapsing in actual experience to the wave function. Quantum physics indicates that consciousness is related to the awareness that an electron appears to show in wave-particle duality via double-slit experiment. Quantum physics has shown that an electron behaves differently when being observed by a human. When the electron is not being observed, the electron behaves like a wave. But when we observe the electron behaves like a particle. This experience indicates the electron will change its behavior in reality depending on whether or not electron is being observed, as if the electron is aware that it is being observed. This awareness is similar, if not the same, as human awareness to consciousness. Thus, consciousness behaves like entanglement. Memory is therefore affected by the collapse of the wave function, ion channel oscillations in neurons, creating quantum phenomena, which generates coherent quantum electric fields to which neurons can integrate this information to produce the hologram. Relativity and quantum physics both predict the future exists before it is experienced. However, due to the fact that time is entangled in the frenzied activity of the quantum continuum, the future, or rather a future, may continually change until the moment it is perceived by consciousness. Since the past is also relative and can exist in the future for some observers and in the present for others, and as the past is entangled with the quantum continuum, then the past is also subject to change after it has been experienced and before it has been experienced by another observer at a downstream location in space-time. Time is entangled and is affected by consciousness, and relative to however not limited of the affected action, therefore of the observer, as a measurement as predicted by quantum mechanics. Every particle, person, planet, star, galaxy has a wave function. The brain and consciousness have a wave function. Reality, including the reality of time, is a manifestation of wave functions and alterations and patterns of activity within the quantum continuum, which are perceived as discontinuous. This also gives rise to the perception of temporal order, and what comes first, second, third, and in what is in the present and in the past. The perception of temporal order and structural units of information are not just perceived, but inserted into quantum states, which causes the reduction of wave packet and collapse of the wave function. The brain and the mind of the time traveler also has a wave function. As predicted by Einstein's field equations, consciousness can be accelerated into the future and from the future into the past. The time traveler, upon observing his surroundings, causes the collapse of the wave function. The discontinuous change in the probability function takes place with the action of registration in the mind of the observer. Consciousness, therefore, could be viewed as a filter which selectively attends to fragments of quantum continuum which are perceived as real, the transition from the possible to the actual. The existence of non-locality in brain function being a basic property of the universe strongly argues for an underlying deep reality out of space-time in the form of an implicit order. But we may assume that this is associated with an extra-dimensional space-times other than the fourth-dimensional space-time. These mechanics also play a different role forms in its transpersonal and extrasensory perception by wave resonance with the universal quantum field. The wave information could be transmitted from and into the brain wave by resonance and may locally collapse to matter entities through conscious observation, including sufficient individual attention and intention. The existence of quantum superposition is a linear function of the extent to which information is available about the alternative states that constitute the superposition. This integral quantum model creates the various spatial-temporal domains that allow both time-symmetric forward and backward causation and therefore a top-down influence of quantum fields. The basic question is how are quantum waves or quantum fields finally perceived by human brain and how they influence or even induce phenomena as self-consciousness. Therefore, according to the Copenhagen interpretation, the observing consciousness is external and separate from, albeit entangled with, what is observed and external to the ensuing collapse of the wave function, which is collapsed by being measured and observed, and this includes the observation and experience of time. However, consciousness can also be conscious of consciousness, and thus consciousness can be subject to waveform collapse when observed by consciousness. Hence, past, present, future are a manifestation of consciousness, which is entangled with time-space and the quantum continuum. Hence, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. Consciousness is consciousness of something, and consciousness can be conscious of not being that object that is conscious of. By knowing what it isn't, consciousness may know what it is not, which helps define what it is. This consciousness of being not the object can be considered the collapse function, which results in discontinuity within the continuum. Consciousness of being conscious, of conscious. Thus, the mind cannot be separated from matter. The ambiguity of uncertainty of the quantum comes through the ambiguity attached to meaning. The quantum is seen as a pool of information shared by entangled particles. Therefore, the mind is not a singularity, but a multiplicity, but different aspects of consciousness and awareness directly associated with specific regions of the brain. These different mental realms and brain areas can perceive time and the quantum continuum differently. Therefore, the mind is a multiplicity, which can become a duality, and which is often perceived as a singularity referred to as consciousness. Consciousness may cause itself. That is, a continuum which is conscious and which exists as entangled into the quantum continuum, which includes time, may cause itself to experience the eternal now, which is simply a collapse of the wave function of time. With entanglement, the future causes the past. Time, the fragmentation of time into temporal sequential units and where causes precede effects are also a derivative of consciousness. If time is a feature of the quantum continuum, and if considered independent of consciousness, then causes and effects may be one and the same, a unity, a simultaneity, such that causes may cause themselves, or effects may be responsible for the cause. Consciousness is entangled with space-time continuum, which includes the future. Conscious observers can also engage in mental time travel upon anticipating or looking to the future. The observing consciousness can then engage in behaviors that are shaped and directed by that future. What constitutes a cause, what constitutes an effect, are relative. It is the anticipation of the future which causes the cause in the present. Precognition is a form of conscious cognitive awareness which involves the acquisition of future knowledge just prior to its occurrence. Premonitions are a form of presentiment or an emotional feeling that something may happen in the near future, but without conscious knowledge of exactly what it is that is going to happen. Both being considered forms of quantum entanglement, where some near future event exerts and makes an impression on consciousness before the event occurs, and when there is absolutely no way the future could be inferred as it's going to happen. In a rotating universe, time is a circle, where the future leads to the past and effects precede causes. The future can affect the present and the past. However, a time traveler journeying along such a loop does not experience slowing down of time, as there is no contraction of space-time. Time will remain the same for the time traveler and all those on Earth, as a time traveler is merely going in a circle, a rotating universe, and closed time-like curves violate the rules of causality. If time circle can back on itself, therefore in itself, time can circle back on itself in and of itself, then the future can affect the past, and temporal discontinuity between past, present, and future is abolished. Time is a circle, and this violates the laws of causality. Therefore, upon reaching superluminal speeds, the time traveler would be headed backwards in time from the future and would pass himself journeying from the past into the future. And the time traveler voyaging toward the future and in the past would pass himself heading back from the future. And the time traveler heading from the future to the past could therefore theoretically alter the past, thereby giving rise to innumerable paradoxes. If time is a circle, then effects cannot always be traced to an earlier cause, for the cause may occur in the future, and this is because in a closed loop, the future can come before the past and even catch up with itself in the past, so the event can be simultaneous with its cause or occur before its cause. An event may be able to cause itself. The river of time is bent around in a circle, and it may have no beginning and no end. Since space-time is curved, warped, and littered with vortexes surrounding black holes and affected by the gravity in innumerable stellar objects, the river of time may also split apart and bend backwards in a circle, which circles within circles. The past and future exist simultaneously, in different and overlapping locations in space. Since space is isotropic, then theoretically there are no roadblocks to prevent a time traveler from choosing a location at will and then speeding up into the future or the past. Light can travel to the future and from the past relative to the observer's frame of reference. However, light and time are not the same. The speed of light and time, be it past or future, are not synonymous, though both may be affected by gravity. Moreover, just as light has a particle wave duality and can physically interact with various substances, time also can be perceived and therefore must have a wave function, if not a particle wave duality. Time-space is interactional and can contract to near nothingness and then continue to contract into a negative direction, such that the time traveler can journey into the past. Therefore, time and time-space is embedded in the quantum continuum and can affect as well as be affected by other particle waves even at great distances, a concept referred to as entanglement. Time and space-time therefore of itself, and yet of itself to be defined, is entanglement. Entanglement can occur independent of and before the act of measurement, and choices made in the future can affect the present. The time at which quantum measurements are taken and their order has no effect on the outcome of a quantum mechanical experiment. Moreover, two photons that exist at separate times can be entangled. In the scenario we present here, measuring the last photon affects the physical description of the first photon in the past before it has even become measured. Thus, the spooky action is steering the system's past. Another point of view is that the measurement of the first photon is merely steering the future physical description of the last photon. In this case, the action is on the future of a part of the system that has not yet been created. Hence, entanglement between photons has demonstrated even before the second photon even exists, a manifestation of non-locality of quantum mechanics, not only in space, but also in time. In other words, a photon may become entangled with another photon even before that photon is created, before it even exists, even after the first photon ceases to exist, and before the second photon is created. both become entangled even though there is no overlap in time. Photons that do not exist can affect photons which do exist, and photons which no longer exist and photons which will exist. Presumably the same applies to all particles, atoms, and molecules. Entanglement commonly occurs at superluminal speeds. However, if an entangled consciousness is affected by the passage of that superluminal information from the future into the present, this can give rise to retrocognition, knowing something has happened or will happen before it happens. Brain areas communicate via neurons, and neurons communicate with each other by sending signals over axons, which are transmitted to and received by dendrites at the synaptic junction belonging to other neurons, which in turn may transmit message via their axon at synaptic junctions to dendrites of other neurons. Heightened brain activity can be linked to accelerated state of consciousness. Accelerated states are also associated with contraction of space-time, such that the future arrives more quickly. Therefore, when brain activity increases and neurons fire more rapidly and process more information, one of the consequences is déjà vu. In other words, just as a time traveler will come closer to the future as he accelerates towards the light speed, when the brain activity accelerates, the future may also come closer such that the leading edge of the future event is experienced by this accelerated state of consciousness just before the event happens in the present. A time traveler, or particle object, speeding toward and then faster than the speed of light at superluminal speeds from the future into the past will affect the quantum continuum. By traveling into the future or the past, the time traveler will interact with and alter every local moment within the quantum continuum, and thus the future or the past. If the past or the future are not altered, this means that these dimensions of time are hardwired as part of the quantum continuum, that these events were already woven into the fabric of time and has always happened, and always will happen, and cannot be altered because they have already happened, albeit in different distant locations of space-time, which are linked as a unity within the quantum continuum. If the future and the past are not altered by voyaging through time, then this is because the time traveler have already journeyed into the past and the future before he journeyed into it. Likewise, a person not only exists in the present, but they will exist in the future. Thus, the future self would also be entangled with the past self, and that self which exists in the present. Consciousness is thus entangled in time, and consciousness is entangled with its own consciousness, which exists in the future, present, or past, such that a future self can affect a past self, including what the past self thinks and feels and anticipates. The future already exists, a concept which is intrinsic to space-time relativity and Einstein's field equations. The future and the past exist in various overlapping locations in space-time, which are in motion, and the same can be said for consciousness. Therefore, just as the end of the movie has already existed as one begins watching the movie, then perhaps the same could be said for the river of time and consciousness as related to the future and the past. If this premise is correct, then one's consciousness also exists in the future and in the past. Time is entangled. Future, past, present are relative and overlapped, and what is a future in one galaxy can be the past in another. All are entangled in the fabric of space-time and the quantum continuum. To get to the past, the time traveler must accelerate towards light speed into the future, and then upon achieving superluminal velocities, length contraction continues in a negative direction. Time runs in reverse, and the destination becomes the past. Time is a circle, and the future flows to the present and the past, and this is because time is entangled in the oneness of quantum continuum. Therefore, tachyons are messengers from the future. It is well established that various particles have velocity close to or at the speed of light. Many of these high-speed particles were hypothetical until their existence was verified experimentally. Photons and electromagnetic waves travel at the speed light, whereas some particles, such as protons and hypothetical tachyons, are also believed to travel faster than the speed of light. The dichotomy between a positive, therefore, and a negative energy of mass implies a duality. The tachyon, which voyages beyond the speed of light, in its antithesis of the tachyon or time machine at the velocity below the speed of light. For example, the tachyon below the speed of light could be considered an anti-tachyon. The anticipation of the particle, therefore, the tachyon, could be a positive energy of the tachyon, which would be traveling forward in time. All existence has a wave function, therefore, including light. Every aspect of existence can be described as sharing particle-like properties and wave-like properties. The wave function is a particle spread out over space-time and describes all various possible states of the particle. Reality is a manifestation of wave functions and alterations in patterns of activity within the quantum continuum, which are entangled and perceived as discontinuous, and includes the perception of time, past, present, future, and consciousness. Consciousness can also reflect upon becoming conscious of being conscious, and in doing so, it creates a collapse of the wave function, which is experienced as a disassociated consciousness observing itself. The wave function of time means that there are infinite futures, present, past, with some more probable than others. As theorized by Hugh Everett in quantum mechanics of universal wave function, is that the fundamental entity of being at all times is a deterministic wave equation. Thus, the wave function is real and is independent of observation or elemental postulates, though it is still subject to quantum entanglement. According to Everett, a collapse, object, state, and associated observer who has observed the same collapse outcome have become correlated by the act of measurement or observation. That is, what the observer perceives and the state of the objects become entangled. The subsequent evolution of each pair of relative subject-object states proceed with complete indifference as to the presence or absence of the other elements, as if the wave function collapse has occurred. However, instead of the wave function collapse, a choice is made among many possible choices, such that among all possible probable outcomes, the outcome that occurs becomes reality. When considered as a unity within the quantum continuum, time and consciousness exist in the future, past, present, and simultaneously. Consciousness which exists in the future is entangled with consciousness which exists in the present and the past, like a rope of a string stretched out and extending in all directions from birth to death of that consciousness. Therefore, just as the hypothetical tachyons can travel from the future to the past, and a circle of time circles from the present to the future and back again, information may also be conveyed from the future to the past, perhaps along the rope of consciousness which extends in all directions and dimensions and is an aspect of the quantum continuum. Acceleration leads to a compression of time-space, such that the future comes closer to the present. The same can be said of accelerated consciousness, thereby giving rise to the phenomenon such as déjà vu, premonitions, precognition, as well as the anticipation and prediction about the immediate future. Dream time is a form of accelerated consciousness, i.e. dream consciousness. Consciousness and dreaming are not synonymous. Dreams may be observed by consciousness, and such dreaming and consciousness are entangled, however, as dream consciousness. Yet, consciousness is generally little more than a passive witness during dreaming, an audience before the stage upon which the dreams are displayed in all their mystery and majestic glory. It is rare for consciousness to become conscious that it is observing a dream, and when such rarities occur, the dreamer may awaken or briefly take an active role in what has been described as lucid dreaming. Unlike conscious time and the conscious mind, dream time and dream consciousness could best be described as a manifestation of many worlds' interpretation of quantum physics, where all worlds are possible, and the past and future and time or space are juxtaposed and intermingled. Time can run backward and forward simultaneously at varying speeds, and multiple realities come and go no matter how improbable. In dream time and dream consciousness, all worlds are possible, simultaneously and in parallel, that exist. These many worlds include those of the future and the past, and where time and space are juxtaposed, and every possible outcome is equally likely, and where the world continually splitting into alternative worlds. Dreamtime consciousness is a manifestation of, in many respects, obeys the laws of many worlds theory of quantum physics. Since all objects have a particle-wave duality, this also explains how an object can be measured as a particle and can be measured as a wave, but not both at the same time in the same world, and how it can be measured in more than one state, each of which exists in another world. The simple act of measurement creates two worlds, both of which exist at the same time in parallel, and each separate version of the universe contains a different outcome of that event. During dream time and during dream consciousness, the reality being dreamed is characterized by every possible outcome. Some dream worlds exist in the future, others in the past, and yet others in the world where the past, present, future are the same, and the same in and of itself to be, you see. Thus, in dream time, the dream consciousness can witness any number of these possible worlds, including those which exist in the future. However, these futures are possible futures which are also observed by dream consciousness and not just dream time. According to many worlds' interpretation, they actually exist. In terms of space-time, these future worlds exist in the future itself in a distant location. In conclusion, as predicted by quantum mechanics, the observer is entangled with that future. However, in dream time, the observer, dream consciousness, directly observes that future, including those futures which are improbable and most probable.